So we have got a couple of events coming up this weekend in the astrology. The first one is the full moon in Libra, and then 41 minutes after that, we have Venus stationing direct in the sign of Pisces. So when that happens, we're still going to be in that full moon energy. And looking at both charts, which I will of course show you in this reading, there are similarities because not much time has lapsed before Venus stations direct. However, there is something to note that I was intuitively drawn to in the charts, and I will draw your attention to that when I show you the charts in a short while. But first of all, let's rewind back to this full moon in Libra. This is happening on the 12th or the 13th of April, depending on where you are in the world. For us in the UK on BST now, British Summer Time, it's happening at 1:22 a.m. on Sunday, the 13th of April. Okay, so that's when it's going to be at its fullest. So with this full moon, we know that full moons illuminate because it illuminates the night sky. But also it's great to work with the energy of a full moon to release and detach from cycles. Okay, and that's been a pretty big theme of late anyway, regardless of the full moons that have been taking place. So if we look at what's going on with the moon and the sun, we know that for a full moon, the sun is in opposition. So we've got the sun in Aries, we're in Aries season at the moment, and the moon will be in Libra. So opposite signs, both cardinal signs, okay, so they both like to start things off, and there is that opposition energy. The sun will be in an exact conjunction at 23 degrees of Aries with Chiron, and Chiron represents our healing journey. So this is in Aries, and it's this heightening of the soul healing essence, okay? Because we've got the sun and we've got Chiron exactly conjunct. Now, 23 degrees, if I just look at numerology, 2 and 3 is 5. 5 is all about change. Major change has been going on. We've seen this in our own lives. We've seen this play out globally, okay? And it's still continuing. Our realities are changing. And we have been asked to detach from cycles that have not been serving us for some time. And it's leading us up to a lot of things to come in this new earth consciousness that we're moving into, okay? But with this full moon, opposite the sun, there can be that sort of emotional pull here to the soul healing that's going on within our sovereignty. So empowering us to, of course, step into being the leader of our own life and how we're healing that, but on a soul level, okay? The sun and Chiron conjunct. But how our emotional home fits into this as well because of the moon and it being a full moon in Libra. So illumination potentially of feelings or aspects within our emotional home where we want fairness because it's Libra, where we want reciprocity, where we want balance and harmony, and we want things to be fair and in a divine justice perspective. That brings about that balance, okay? Now, Libra in astrology represents the 7th house of relationships. So this particular full moon could be illuminating a lot relating to our relationships with people, with places, and with things. So I've said many a time, astrology is the bigger picture. So it's important if you're looking at your own situation to look at your own natal chart and how the transits are impacting your chart to show how the energy could be playing out for you. And it's important, therefore, if we're looking at Libra in terms of relationships, we would look at where the full moon's happening, of course, for you. We would look at the 7th house. So what's going on in your 7th house, which isn't going to be Libra for everybody because everybody's unique. But what I'm saying is Libra rules the 7th house. So we look at the 7th house. And if there's particular connections with people, we'd look at the 11th house as well. So it's the bigger picture. Okay. And I went off on a tangent there. But essentially the message here with this full moon is relationships with people, places, things that have maybe been sort of under the microscope for some time, and maybe where cycles need to transform or perhaps even close out certain patterns relating to those. Well, this could be illuminated further in this full moon, okay, because full moons can bring clarity. We've just seen the eclipses and what that's done for us. Neptune has moved into Aries, bringing more of a spiritual awakening to people within the collective. There have been so many shifts going on energetically of recent months that we are all becoming more and more awake to who we are, what's right for us and what isn't right for us. So this is continuing that theme. And under the spotlight of the full moon on this occasion, it's relationships. Okay, so if we can use that energy to work in our favor, then it's all about understanding from that Sun and Chiron, from the soul healing perspective as a sovereign being, what we are commanding as a sovereign being within our relationships, and where certain aspects need to be transformed or released, okay, in relation to that. And it could also be just bringing up elements of fairness and where things need to be more balanced. So that's giving us more of that insight into where we need to heal on a soul level. Sun and Chiron conjunct opposite the full moon. Okay, so this is playing out for us in that way. Okay, in the chart, there's quite a lot going on. I mean, we've got a ground trine. We've actually got a kite that's in the chart, and we've got a YOD, which is a finger of God as well. So I'm going to pull this up very shortly and show this to you. But it's important to remember, it's not going to resonate for everybody. This is about looking at the planetary aspects and the energy, okay, that this creates, my intuitive interpretations of the astrological data that is there in the chart, plus any channeled insights, okay, from the pure white light as well, to help inspire and empower you on your journey. But it's important to note this is collective, okay, because I'm looking at the chart of the astrological event, freeze frame of the cosmos at the time of the full moon. If you look at your natal chart against it, it's going to give you a bigger picture. And this is why I often show the UK's natal chart against the chart of the astrological event in question, in order to provide context to the house system. Okay, so let's jump right in. Let me pull up the first chart. Okay, so this is going to be the full moon because this is happening first. Okay. That's the wrong one. Anybody who think it's still Mercury retrograde, I am going to come on to that one. That was Venus. Okay, here we go. Right, here's the full moon in Libra. Okay, so as you can see, for us in the UK on BST, okay, this is 1:22 a.m. on the 13th. Okay, so it's going to be the 12th for some people in the world. Okay, now you can see lots of things drawn, and there's many more other lines. So if you're familiar with my astrology reports, I'm guided to certain aspects, okay, to show you, because there are certain messages that need to come through. So I have marked up certain aspects here that we're going to dive into. And when you see the chart, which you've already had a bit of a teaser with, which is the Venus stationing direct chart, 41 minutes after this, it's pretty similar. Okay, so there is still that ongoing message of what the full moon's giving us, because we're still going to be in that energy when that happens. Okay, but here we have the full moon in Libra. So as I say, moon in Libra, opposite the Sun and Chiron in an exact conjunction degrees wise, okay, in Aries. So we're in Aries season, and we know Neptune is there as well, but there's still a lot of energy in Pisces. Okay, so we are still having to look at the end of cycles, major cycles, and the beginning of new ones, and stepping more from that mutable energy into that cardinal energy of being driven to move forward. Now, I'll point out at this particular juncture that Mars, and I've mentioned this before, okay, Mars is over here, and he's quite involved in some of this stuff, okay, which we'll come on to. But Mars is in Cancer, and he doesn't really like being in Cancer because he's got to feel the feelings. Mars wants to take action, okay? And Mars rules Aries. So, you know, he's not in Aries, he's in Cancer, and he's having to feel the feelings. He was in retrograde for some time, and that was pretty intense because of hidden stuff coming up that needs to be dealt with and processed before being able to then take action. And I felt, and I've said this before, that this is a preparatory phase for when Mars moves into Leo, which is happening on the 18th of April, just next week. Okay. And that's when there is more fire energy supporting the action that we are being guided to take. Okay. That drive from within to take action based on what we want. Remember, it's that sovereign essence that Mars carries as well. And when he moves into Leo, there is that essence of being seen and recognized. okay? And having the courage of that Leo energy to put yourself out there. So it feels very, very prominent. And it's the day before we move into Taurus season. So Mars is having to, bless him, go through all of Aries, you know, the sign that he rules. He's having to go through all of Aries season, having to feel his feelings. But then that moment's going to come when he's in Leo, and it's going to open up a lot more things. There's going to be a lot more fire energy that's going to support the action. But we have to process these things first, because otherwise, how do we know what we want to take action on? And how do we know where we might have held ourselves back in the past? Okay, these are lessons that we're learning as well. Let's not forget that. Remember, I keep saying it's the bigger picture of everything going on. So with that being said, I went off on a tangent with Mars, but he is pivotal to what's going on, because this is preparatory phase, and having the full moon in Libra asking us to look at our relationships and to look at addressing fairness and balance and reciprocity, we've got to understand what needs to be closed out from a sovereign perspective to restore that balance. Okay, that's what this is about. And illumination of certain things, you know, to become clear of what needs to actually change to restore that balance in whatever way it might be. Okay, and if you can see straight away the YOD, which is the white triangle here, okay, that's pointing towards the moon. So the full moon is definitely a focus of this YOD, which is a finger of God in the astrology chart. Okay, it's a big point towards, look at your emotional home and look at your relationships and look at what's fair, look at what's balanced. Is there justice in that relationship? Or do we need to restore some balance? Because at the base, we've actually got Venus, as well as some other energy there, because obviously they're all close together, but we've actually got Venus and we've got Uranus. Okay, that's where the point, when you break down the actual chart, that's where it points to. Okay, so at the base, we've got this change within our physical reality, Uranus in Taurus, that corresponds with our worth and values as well, by the way. And then we've got Venus reminding us of our values and our worth as well. So that's underpinning this focus towards our emotional home and what we know to be true within our emotions, of what is fair and what is not fair within our relationships with people, places, and things. Okay? So the YOD is a focus point. And it's not to say it's easy, it's not to say it's pretty, it's not to say it's not without challenging aspects. But it is to do with a focus point, that this moon is a pivotal focus point to the change that we need to experience in our relationships to restore balance, and it's based on worth and values, as well as the changes we want to experience in our physical reality. Because if we want to experience a relationship that is fair and reciprocal, we've got to feel worthy of that. We've got to address our values as part of that. But if we're not changing anything, our physical reality is not going to change. So that's why there is focus on this full moon of what's coming up, the illumination aspect, and what we know we need to release and detach from. Okay? So if I go back to this opposition with the sun and Chiron, now here I've drawn two lines, if you can see, because actually there is an opposition point to the midheaven of this chart. And that isn't there on the Venus chart that I will show you. So here, it is very much about the illumination and clarity that comes through from this full moon that is going to enable that soul essence healing from a sovereign perspective, as I was saying. And vice versa, you know, as we heal more as a sovereign soul and we become more empowered as a sovereign soul, we can then understand what our emotions are saying in terms of what is fair and what is not fair for us. But that illumination is also bringing us that inspiration. When we think of the midheaven, think of that as being the crown chakra of this particular astrological event. So the insight we're getting from this full moon is pivotal for that soul healing. And let's not forget that this can also be saying to us that our relationships can be healed to restore balance. So it's not just a cutthroat, close out that relationship, you know, detached from that relationship. It might be, there might be elements of that. And it doesn't have to be a relationship with a person. That can be a relationship with a place. It's time for me to move on. Okay, because I'm not getting that equal give and take from this area like I used to. It's not aligned with me anymore. So there's no divine justice in this area for me. It's not giving back to me what I'm putting into it. You know, same with a job. Same with our own thought patterns. Well, I keep telling myself this, that's not really fair on me, is it? So I need to address that. So as I say, it's the bigger picture, relationships with people, places, things. But if we look at relationships with people, okay, it's not necessarily having to just walk away from everybody. This is saying about relationships can be healed as long as we've got that essence of sovereignty within us, and we're acting from a place of that cardinal energy of the self, what we want and what's right for us, and what feels fair and just for us, then we can possibly heal relationships as long as that change, that transformation happens. Because remember, the YOD is pointing at the moon with Venus and Uranus at the base. You know, not to mention all the other energy in Pisces, which is about speaking up. It's about our path forward. It's about lessons that we're learning. So boundaries we need to put in place to heal relationships. So it can be a very healing time for relationships if we are speaking up from that place of sovereignty and with a view to restoring balance. Okay, so that's important to note there. Now, the kite, don't know if you can see the kite, because we've got the green triangle, which is the grand trine, and then we've got the two sextiles, which is the purple lines, and of course together that makes a kite. Now at the top you'll see we've got the south node in Virgo, and then the sextiles going to Mars and of course to Juno. So just looking at that, because sextiles and trines are harmonious aspects, okay, so it's that energy is working well together. At the top, we look at the south node there. So, of course, you know, this is about detachment from the past. Well, if we're trying to move forward and heal things, we are detaching from the past. But Virgo is all about having control. So there is an element of needing to surrender and to not be so controlling of the outcome of situations. So if we're trying to heal a relationship or detached from a relationship, it's about not having any expectation of outcome and being too controlling of what it might look like. So, okay, we know that a relationship, whatever it is, whoever it is with, whatever it is with, needs to change, to heal, to bring back that balance. But how it might change, we might not have control over that. So we've got to detach from those expectations. And in sextile to Mars and Juno, well, that's in sextile to some masculine energy, Mars, and feminine energy, Juno. Juno's in Sag, so this is about, you know, commitment to our path and what we're discovering on our path forward on this journey. And it can pertain to love and marriage, okay? It can relate to soul contracts here. So that needs to be taken into account because we're talking about relationships. So yes, our path forward, commitment to our path forward, and the willingness to be open to discover what is being revealed to us in relation to soul contracts, in relation to our path, okay? And then Mars on the other side, having to feel the things that are coming up, to process them so that when the time is right, action can be taken, okay? Now, obviously, Juno and Mars are also in trine because you can see the green line, and that's the start of the grand trine. So they are also working together in that way. So you see how that all connects together. And they are in this grand trine with all this energy I've lined up here because that's where the points are on this particular chart, okay? So we've got all that energy in Pisces. We've got Venus, we've got Saturn, we've got the North Node, and we've got Mercury very close together. And then Neptune also, because he is just into Aries. Okay. So there is a mixture of fire and water in this particular grand trine. And it's definitely relating to those endings because of Pisces moving into Aries. So endings and new beginnings, transformation, cycles. It's a path of discovery. What is coming up for us to understand within our relationships and how we're committed to our path, how we're committed to people. And what do we need to feel to process in order to take action when the time is right? Because this does feel like a preparatory phase. As we're looking at the essence of closing out major cycles for us. Okay. And this is not to say, and I'll repeat it, about necessarily closing out all of your relationships with people. If it's a relationship that's not serving you anymore, of course, that's going to resonate. But when we look at the healing of the relationship aspect, and if it's a soul contract, because we've got Juno in the mix, okay, and we got, by the way, the South Node, so past life karmic contract as well, okay, soul contract. So if we look at that and what's being revealed and illuminated to us within the full moon energy, it enables us to close out certain cycles. It's not to say it's necessarily closing out that soul contract, but it might be. Okay, but it's certainly about closing out something that's going to heal relationship. If it's closing out past life soul contracts, that's going to heal our relationship with ourselves, isn't it? Because we're going to become more empowered as that sovereign soul, and it restores balance. And it's an ending and a beginning. So again, take it as it resonates, but there is a lot mixed up here to do with commitments to the path and what is being revealed to us, processing the feelings that are coming up, detachment from expectation of outcome and not being too controlling of the outcome, having that surrender, but also acknowledging past life patterns and karmic contracts that are coming up as well, and closing out cycles that challenge our values, our own boundaries, that challenge our path forward, and that challenge our expression with Venus, Saturn, North Node and Mercury in Pisces there. Okay, so it's big. This is a big full moon, and you understand now why the YOD, the finger of God, is pointing at the moon. Okay, got to get our values in check. We've got to understand that the change we want to experience in our physical reality is possible if we can close out what we need to close out, heal what we need to heal, and of course step into that sovereignty. But this is acknowledgement of the path and what is being revealed, and processing the uncomfortable feelings. That's the challenging part of it. But without doing that, how do we know? So it's very important. Okay, right. Now, Mars, I mentioned that, you know, there's a lot of attention on Mars. I've just been talking about Mars as well. There are a couple of squares here. So we have got the Sun and Chiron in square to Mars, also a square to the moon, because we know that the moon and the sun with Chiron are in direct opposition. So that forms the two squares to Mars. Okay, so it's like pointing at Mars as well. So we've got a YOD that's pointing at the moon, but we've also kind of got this arrow pointing towards Mars, if you can see that. And so it's very important for us to process what is coming up, because this is the preparatory phase before he moves into Leo. Let me tell you that. Okay. There's another line here that's also across to Lilith in Scorpio. Okay, the other side of the midheaven point here. So part of what we're having to process is, of course, feelings, and that can be challenging. We already know that Mars feels uncomfortable doing that. And Mars, by the way, is at 27 degrees. He's getting to that final point of Cancer. So, you know, within that final decan, it can be more challenging and more intense because he's closing out a cycle in Cancer. So notice the theme here, closing out cycles. So we're having to feel these things. And part of that, if we're thinking, well, this isn't fair, this isn't just, this isn't right. Okay, we've got to feel all of this. It's allowing us to heal, but it might still feel horrendous at the time. Okay. And that's because the shadow aspects are coming up as well. And Lilith in Scorpio, deep rooted shadow aspects that have maybe challenged our worth and values, that have maybe challenged how we feel about certain things, that have maybe challenged us or allowed us to self-sabotage in certain situations. We've got to feel all of this. And again, it can feel horrendous, but we have to feel it to know what needs to go. Okay, to know what we need to detach from. So that's why it's very important. Mars is playing a pivotal role here, even if he feels weak in the sign of Cancer. actually, this is more empowering for us because we're having to feel these things, and then we know what's driving us to take the action we want to take. We want to be seen and recognized for who we are. So we need to understand what has been holding us back. Is it us? Is it other people? Is it patterns? You know, all of these things, processing it. And I've drawn this line here because we've got this other conjunction here with Poseidon and Vesta, and they've been together for some time. So this is about churning stuff up from the depths of the ocean within our soul in that scorpionic way to come to the surface for us to look at. So it's the same sort of energy. And it's deep stuff. It's not surface level. And with Vesta there, that's about the sacred flame. So what really sparks that flame within us? What inspires us? Who inspires us? Who sparks that flame within us? Does that relationship spark that flame within us? No. Okay, why? Well, this is coming up and telling me this. I've got to process this. I've let it go on for too long. It's not fair. It's not balanced. It's not right. Okay, right. Let's focus on the emotions. Let's try and restore balance. Where are my values at? Where is my worth at? What do I need to change in my physical reality? And how am I going to now transform this situation based on what's being illuminated to me on my path that's coming up for me to discover? Am I committed to seeing this through? Is this a past life karmic contract or pattern that I've got to close out because it's not serving me? Let's look at all of this and let's process this. And it's being accepting of all of this, because that is actually leading to the healing of the soul in a sovereign way, even if it doesn't feel like it. Okay? Because the emotions are having to be felt in relation to it. But if we don't feel those emotions, as I've said, how do we know? How do we know? Okay? So that's the full moon. Now, I got a bit passionate about that, as you can tell. So here we have got the chart against the UK's chart. Okay, this is just to show you context with the house system, which you can do with your own natal chart. So the moon here. Okay, so for the UK as a collective, it's happening in the 4th house. So in direct opposition, we have got the Sun and Chiron there in the 10th house. Okay, so within our foundation, 4th house, these feelings are coming up, and the illumination is coming up within our very foundation of what is fair and what is not fair. Now, Lilith is also there in the 4th house, as you can see, even though Scorpio, and that's why natal charts are unique, because we might have 2 or 3 signs in one house. Okay, so shadow aspects are coming up. So it's almost like shaking our foundations to get us to see what is not fair and what is not balanced. And you could actually apply that to what's going on in the UK at the moment. Okay, we're seeing things are being illuminated to us, and it might be triggering us because we know it's not fair. So it's enabling us to see this in our own reality, in our own experience. Okay, because we can only go by what we feel and what we have the power to change in that way. Okay, for our own lives. But we could be seeing that it's illuminated to us even more, and it's bringing up shadow aspects that need to be looked at. Now, these could be challenging our inner authority because of the 10th house and boundaries and things like that. But also, this could pertain to work for a lot of people. Okay, so it could be that the relationship in question is a relationship with work. Okay, and wanting to heal the sovereignty and to step forward as being that sovereign leader, but being challenged by the foundational aspect of what is not fair, what is not right, and what needs to change. Okay, I mentioned before about looking at the 7th house because that is the house that Libra rules in astrology. So here we have got Pluto in the 7th house in Aquarius in this chart. Okay, this is major death and rebirth within relationships. Okay, that's a mic drop moment. Major transformation. So this full moon and the fact that the YOD points towards the moon is pivotal, and I felt it was pivotal. So, you know, where's it playing out in your chart, for example, and what's going on in your 7th house? Where's Pluto? So where might this deep transformation be happening for you? It's the bigger picture as we look at it all. Okay, And you know, interestingly, Venus in the mix, obviously at the base of the YOD, is the 9th house, and Uranus is over there in the 11th. So absolutely discovery, 9th house, of what needs to change in our physical reality within connections with others. That's challenging our foundation of fairness. That's the YOD in this particular instance. Okay, so as a collective for the UK, that is what's going on. So, you know, and Venus actually is in exact conjunction with the UK's natal Mercury. So, you know, this is about learning how we need to speak up about this from a place of spiritual integrity, soul's truth, and what our intuition might be telling us about this when it comes to our worth and values in these situations. Okay. Now, the other thing I was drawn to in this chart is the fact that Mars is transiting the 12th house. I've said this before because he's been there for a time. And this is absolutely about hidden subconscious feelings because it's the 12th house. Now, you'll see that the ascendant point in this chart for the UK is 29 degrees Cancer. So he's getting close to that. So he's conjunct the ascendant. So when we think of how we show up in the world, okay, that is how we show up to other people. There is something hidden about this at the moment, as my nose is itching. So take that as you will, okay, for the UK as a collective. But there is something hidden. There is something going on beneath the surface, okay? And actually, you know, he's going to move into Leo, as I said, and he's going to move into the 1st house. So that's going to be more empowering in terms of a self perspective, and it's kind of going from the hidden to being seen. And at the moment, this is about, you know, showing up, needing to process these feelings to be able to show up in that authentic way, but also recognizing the ascendant point in this chart is 29 degrees. That's right at the end. So we're getting to the end of a cycle here of things being hidden before action can be taken. Okay. Right. I'm going to leave that there, and I'm just going to show you the Venus chart, which I kind of did by mistake earlier. So here we go. Now, obviously, it looks different because I've not marked everything up on this chart. This was the chart I actually looked at first because I was looking at Venus first. I was being called to Venus first. But this moment is happening 41 minutes after the full moon in Libra. So we're still going to be in the full moon energy, and the kite is still there, even though I've not drawn that other sextile, but you can see from the south node to Juno, it's still there. Okay. And we've still got the squares to Mars. So Mars is still definitely a focus point. And because this is Venus stationing direct in Pisces, it's important to look at what the masculine essence is doing because we want to balance the two. Okay. So understanding that, yes, a lot of this is the same of what I've just shown you. But there isn't that opposition now from the Sun and Chiron, still in exact conjunction. No opposition with the midheaven point at this point. Okay, so that's why the full moon is pivotal, because that's going to bring in that illumination to inspire what we need to know about what's fair and what's not. Okay, here we've still got that challenge with the emotional home. We still need to feel these things, so that message is still the same, as well as the other messages. We've still got this conjunction over here, which is of course things coming up to the surface for us to see, sacred flame energy as well. But all the other aspects are the same. We've still got focus on Mars about what we need to process in terms of what's coming up, the shadow aspects, the feelings for things, and how that's challenging our sovereignty, but it's also empowering us as well, because we understand then what action we might need to take when he stations, not stations direct, sorry, I'm thinking of Venus, when he ingresses into Leo on the 18th of April, okay? We know the Grand Trine is there, so that's still the case. So Venus, when we look at Venus and what's going on there, okay, yes, we've still got that Grand Trine energy. So it's still about the underpinning values that we have and what we're discovering on our path and what we need to feel, if anything is challenging those values. Now, Venus in Pisces, okay, there is that essence of unconditional love and the empathy, that nurturing energy, and it feels okay, Venus in Pisces, because it's that's feminine energy, okay, being nurtured by feminine energy, and it's the spiritual aspects here of understanding values from a soul perspective, okay, because there's only 1 degree between Venus and Saturn. And so we're still learning lessons when it comes to love, Venus, when it comes to money, Venus, when it comes to our values and worth, Venus. Okay, so we're still having to learn those lessons from a soul perspective, because Saturn wants us to get in alignment with our soul's truth. So of course, Venus was in Aries, and that's quite dominant energy for the feminine planet to be in, and you know, where we need to be bold in that femininity, but then retrograding back, just like Mercury did, by the way, and kind of, you know, passing Neptune along the way as Neptune moved into Aries, and both of those planets have obviously moved back into Pisces. So it's kind of like also hovering over that cusp point of the emphasis of endings and what do we need to revisit. So she retrograded back and made it to 24 degrees of Pisces, and will now at this point station direct and then begin to move forward. So there will be an opportunity for her to then become bold again when she moves into Aries, and she has to step into that cardinal energy. But there is still this kind of feeling at the moment that she needs to understand what the soul values are, and if boundaries need to be put in place, certainly where values and worth are in the mix, because the YOD is still there, even though I've not drawn it, but the YOD that I just showed you in the other chart, she's still at the base with Uranus. So it's very much underpinning the detachment from cycles that we need to do with the full moon energy, and to restore balance. We need to understand what our soul values are, okay? And that comes from our spiritual integrity, what we know and feel to be true within, and having that nurturing aspect with ourselves as we proceed through all of these lessons. Okay, now the North Node is there, so we're on this path, being guided by our intuition and that inner compass. And that can feel out of a comfort zone, because perhaps we want to have control. We've got to be more in that flow and surrender state. But Mercury also in Pisces. Okay, next week he's going to be in Aries, so that's going to be more of that kind of, you know, authoritative expression, I suppose, within our communication. But he's also saying, you know, let's communicate, Mercury, let's communicate with our intuition, understand what our intuition is telling us in order to propel us forward into this new cycle. And Venus is doing the same from a values perspective and from a love perspective as well, love and money, worth and values. Okay, so we're looking at all of that. And you know, this is feminine energy that is surrounded by with the exception of Ceres, because Ceres is divine feminine energy just to the left of her, but there is quite masculine energy there in Pisces. So it's kind of like that, almost feels like it's not forcing us to do it, but because we know that we are at the end of these cycles that need to kind of close out or transform in some way, there is almost this underlying, and I say pressure, but it's not meant to be a kind of you have to do this, but we're feeling this urge, I suppose, to do things. Now, I'll remind you again about Mars. This is the preparatory phase before he moves into Leo. So even though we're getting the urge, we're still having to process these things, and we're still having to learn the lessons that Saturn is teaching us, because that is part of our path forward as well, to get more in touch with our soul and what our soul is telling us. Okay, so we've got to process these things, and there needs to be that element of patience to it. But we might feel the urge because we know what's coming. We know that there are new cycles beginning. We know inherently within us from our intuition that there is new just around the corner. So there is this kind of almost keenness because of the urge that we feel, but we still need to, from that masculine perspective, slow down a bit, because there's still things that are coming up for us to see. Okay, and the full moon will obviously give us some of that as well, as indicated by this chart. But we know next week Mercury is going to move into Aries. Okay, so that's fire energy within our expression. So not to get fiery with people, but to actually be more kind of bold and assertive in what we're saying, speaking up for what we want as that sovereign soul from a place of the self. What do we want? And then, you know, a couple of days later, I think it is, Mars will then move into Leo. So that's kind of like then the masculine essence being seen, the action being taken, the courage coming forth. and having that recognition for who we are based on what we've had to understand, what we've had to learn and process in order to get in alignment with our truth. And then we are seen as that expression of ourself. And it might be a different self because we've had to get in touch with who we are and close out the cycles that are not in alignment with us. So it's very powerful, very, very powerful. Okay. So that's happening 41 minutes after the full moon, as I say. And for us in the UK, that's on the 13th. But again, for some people, it's still going to be the 12th. I think I've got the chart that shows with the UK. No, I haven't. But essentially, it's going to be, if I just pull this one back up, it's going to be the same, because 41 minutes later, you know, Venus is still going to be there in the 9th house, but she will just be then direct. Okay, so there's still that emphasis on the expression, but actually it's more to do with expression from that intuitive perspective, what our intuition is telling us, you know, in terms of all of this that's coming up. And certainly with that full moon energy and that YOD, that feels very pivotal, pointing towards the full moon and almost saying, look, draw your attention here to what's coming up in your emotions that's not fair, that's not reciprocal, that's not just, that's not right. And how does that align? Is that out of balance with your values, with Venus at the base? Is it out of balance with the physical reality you're trying to change in your life? And if so, it needs to be, you know, transformed in some way, healed in some way, or detached from, you know, if it's a cycle that needs to close out, because we are at that endings beginnings, as I've mentioned. But essentially, you know, it's also about kind of relinquishing control in a certain way, knowing that things need to change and being open to that without being too controlling of what it might then look like if it's a transformative relationship. But it is about, you know, these endings for us to step forward into this new true version of ourselves, okay, ready to take the action that we need to take going forward on our path, on our enlightened path, it feels like, okay. And what's coming up on our path as part of the quest, as part of the discovery, and processing what we need to, but being committed to that as well. So it's understanding that, okay, things might be a bit bumpy because things are coming up and we've got to feel them. We've got to process what's coming up to close out these patterns once and for all. And there could be heavy past life stuff coming up, deep-rooted patterns that are coming up out of nowhere. And we've got to have time to process them. So this kind of preparatory phase that I keep referring to is essential for all of that, so that we can process and close things out once and for all, even if it's a self-limiting belief that's come up from childhood. Even if it is a pattern that's come up from a past life and you're only understanding now why it's coming up and it needs to be released and healed in this lifetime. That is a relationship that's being healed, and we are pivotal to that. But there could, of course, be actual relationships with people, places, things that we are healing and or closing out at this time. Illumination, okay, with the full moon, clarity, that inspiration, but ultimately being committed to the path and what we are discovering, because we're understanding then that we're open to understanding what's coming up for us to see without being too controlling of what it is, because we don't know what it is. Okay, so sending you love and blessings for this full moon in Libra that's just around the corner, and of course Venus subsequently stationing direct in Pisces, and then that movement forward will have more energy moving into Aries, of course, and you know, things will align in a different way. So I'll be back with further astrology reports, but until then, sending you love and blessings. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.